Will the light go on?
Yes, it is.
There it is. Are we live?
Welcome, everybody, to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm Josh Fenton. It is Business Monday. Next to me is one of the preeminent architectural writers in the United States, Will Morgan. Formerly used to write for the Boston Globe, lots of other high-flying, hoity-toity publications around America. A Pulitzer finalist once upon a time,
Twice.
Right? Twice, not once, but twice. And he's our resident expert, has done some fine work for GoLocal. Let's go around the city. There's a lot of projects going on. The one that made some news this morning is the biggest, tallest, first skyscraper proposed in Providence and really in decades, the Fane Tower. Give us some thoughts about the...
I was a little surprised that's still on the boards. I would have thought that kind of thing would be long gone. It's absolutely a ridiculous idea. We don't need a tall building. We certainly don't need that tall building. 46 towers. Yeah. And it's so sort of typical. You know, you think this is supposed to be the creative capital, and we just sort of lay down and get raped all over again. Oops, I can't use that word. Sorry. But they're taking away some of the parkland. They're taking away the zoning ordinances. They're going to give this guy something to build a building which basically looks like one of those condo towers in Fort Lee, New Jersey. There's nothing special about it, and it's not that it's tall. It's just that it's not very good. And one of the things that I think about with the commission, the I-195 commission, you look them up, and there's one person that has a master's degree in community planning, but other people are bankers and financial consultants and a doctor. I mean, you wouldn't go to, you wouldn't go to a city planner or an architect for say, heart surgery. So then why should you go to doctors and bankers to plan the city? I mean, this is basically what it is. And if you continue on that website, there's the thing called the Providence Design and something or other. And there's nothing about design on it. There's not even an architect's name mentioned. Providence Innovation and Design District. Where's the design?
So I'm going to count you as undecided about this proposal.
I'm not undecided. But it was bad from the beginning. I can't believe that it's still here. And it's not because it's a tall building. One of the things that...
Is it especially... A lot of people seem to react to it because it's disconnected to the other tall buildings in the city. So, you know, if you look at Manhattan, there's a congregation of skyscrapers. Yeah. It's not like one's over here and one's up the river and one's over there. There's sort of some symmetry.
Right. No, it's not any of it. It's just that's the wrong building. And I don't mind them having a tall building here, but it really ought to be in Tulsa or Phoenix or somewhere. It has nothing whatsoever to do with Providence. And I think what makes a great city and which makes Providence a great city is it's walkable.
Yeah.
And it has to do with scale. And that's not about scale, having all those garages on the bottom and those tall buildings. You don't meet people on the elevator. You don't have human intercourse on the elevator. You don't exchange anything other than a greeting if you do that on an elevator.
Right.
And it's just the kind of thinking, it's sort of like Robert Moses were still alive. and that's what I can't, think about, one of the things that Fane calls it, he says it's going to be iconic, which is a word that should be banned, but bold and innovative. It's not bold, it's not innovative, it's
just tall.
1972 in Indianapolis, Indiana.
Now, let's invert this, because I remember the last building that really was widely criticized. It's now owned by Brown University. Hemingway's is in the first floor of it, was the Q building built over by, I think it was Old Stone Bank to be their headquarters.
Yeah.
80s, I'm going to guess.
Well, I like that building. You want to talk about it?
Yeah. Well, so let me just go to, so there was two arguments. One, it was horrific, it was out of scale, it was next to the old stone, beautiful gold dome, it blocked views, etc. How is this not just another larger version
that's a little bit. First of all, they had a really good architect, Edward Larrabee Barnes.
Okay.
And one of the reasons that Providence got that design, I don't think it's that bad. It's only, 5 stories tall as opposed to maybe a little more than that. But
7, 8.
Barnes got so irritated with dealing with Providence that he gave him that design. He originally had an idea that was brick, that was designed to fit in with the College Hill
Yeah.
was supposed to be, and he got sort of everyone sort of frutzing around about it. And he said, "Okay, we'll just give them this." And I don't know why they agreed to it, but I don't think it's too bad. I mean, at least it has decent proportions. It looks solid. It doesn't look like it's made out of aluminum foil.
No, it definitely doesn't. One of the things, though, people who had offices in that building said it was a phenomenal building because you had such tremendous views down the bay. Folks who live in the Fane Tower, if it moves forward, will have phenomenal views down the bay. The best views ever in the history of mankind.
Why don't you give them a drone and just set up a regular camera so they can do it? I mean, you can't climb the stairs. You're separated. You're isolated. There are a number of reasons that you don't like tall buildings, and part of them are environmental and design-wise. But what's the point? Providence is a walkable city. It's small. We're in this studio here. I can look out. I can see people on the street. Someone just stopped to help someone. She's looking in the window. She's doing her hair. She doesn't see us. She helped the guy light a cigarette. I mean, this is what you meet people. It's commerce. I think one of the things that we could do for Providence, we could make a rule. Would you go to Europe to see this building?
No, you would not.
Well, but
No.
if you use that, apply that to buildings, you wouldn't go. You know,
You
wouldn't go to see the Fane building. You wouldn't.
So I'm going to count you out of undecided. You're slightly on the negative side on the Fane Tower.
Slightly.
Slightly on the negative side. Let's go a little bit further around the city. The Wexford building. This is moving as quickly as the speed of sound. I've never seen a building go up so quickly.
The bland leading the bland.
And it seems to be, I think one of the reasons why it's going so quickly is the state's poured in about $40+ million in subsidies to it, and it's a centerpiece to Governor Raimondo's reelection. It's the first real commerce building being built on the 195 land. What's your take on that?
Forgive me, but what I don't get is that Gina Raimondo spent time on 3 of the most beautiful university campuses in the world.
Harvard, Yale, and
Oxford. Did she have her eyes open? Did she notice anything? Was any of this thing related? Was it all law? Was it all, what was it?
She was studying. She was very busy, and she was studying the entire time.
Well, here's the thing with the Wexford building. These people have made a career, or they have a model, they have a template of a research center near universities and university towns. Fine, nothing wrong with that. The problem is, I don't know, do they have an architect? Do they have some guy that's stamping drawings? Basically, it's real estate. And it's nothing that you would cross the street. You know.
So is it objectionable? Is it going to mesh in with...
It's not a stick in your eye. No, it's not going to mesh with anything. It's going to look like any other Wexford project on 128 or the equivalent around Indianapolis or Phoenix or Tulsa or any other place.
It is amazing. 128 continues to build buildings, and they still get uglier and uglier.
They get uglier and uglier. But they got Boston in the center. They've got the core, and we have this core. But the Wexford buildings, there's another thing that's happening in Providence is all this stuff is about square footage.
Yeah.
And the other thing is jobs. You know, there's a new hotel going up there, and the sign for the architect is about this big, and the sign for the International Brotherhood of some kind of union is huge. And there's this theme going on, as they did with the Fane Tower, thinking that you need jobs, 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 jobs. If you build a crappy building, there's the same number of jobs as if you build a good building. Perhaps there are even more people using a good building because you may be using better materials, you know.
More detail.
There's always this thing that if you hire an architect or you hire some, something. I just want some people to realize that these are important stuff. It's going to be here for 50 or 100 years.
One of the buildings that's new to and it's a little snuck away, is next to Grace Church. They've added a building here on Wade Bossett. So we've got 2 negatives. Let's talk about, and I don't think most people have seen it. We're going to be doing an event which we're going to be announcing in a couple weeks there, but talk a little bit about the pavilion.
I think you'll see it when the landscaping is done. Right now it's pretty open. Pavilion was a very sensitive, thoughtful thing. They went and hired a real architecture firm, people that have won awards, and they're not just in the pockets of developers, or some political party. Centerbrook in Centerbrook, Connecticut, done some great stuff. I don't like all of their stuff, but they've done some really fine buildings, and the architect Jim Childress went to RISD. He knows about Providence.
Right.
He thought about it. He understood the scale. He tried to make it Gothic. That's where I think maybe it falls down a little bit, but It's a great idea. They use great materials.
Glass and beautiful
And
copper work.
a lot of copper.
Nobody uses copper
Nobody
anymore.
uses it. Must be the most amount of copper in Rhode Island. Why it hasn't been stolen, I don't know. But and it's going to change color. And you know, Grace Church. You've been inside the church.
Oh yeah.
I mean, gosh, this place. Now, if this were in Europe,
Right.
you'd go and see it.
Right.
It's fabulous.
St. Paul's-esque.
It's fabulous. So I think they did a great job on that addition. It's small. It's not a stick in your eye, and it doesn't look cheap. The Fane Tower looks cheap.
Yeah.
Wexford looks cheap. You know, I mean, there's not enough material on it, but they're already booked forever on weddings.
Yeah, yeah.
It's doing really well, and that the church is an anchor
Right.
downtown, and it's, you know, it's on Westminster Street in Weybosset, walkable streets.
Absolutely. Let's go up to Brown University. Now,
let's-
Brown's always on a building binge, right? And they
Well-
just built a new engineering building.
Right. Brown should be one of the great leaders in architecture in this town, and it's kind of faltering. They always have a slight problem. They hire great architects, and then they never know what to do with them. But
They do have some of the ugliest buildings in the history of Rhode Island. I mean,
such as
the science library.
yeah, the science library is one of those things that happens when people are out of town. You know, in August it got built. But there's another thing where somebody paid off the city, the people that decide this stuff. It's terrible. But close to it, the engineering building is really, I find it very attractive. Proportions are great. But the interesting thing about that is it's designed by a firm called Kieran Timberlake, and they're one of the great firms in America. And their shtick is starting with environmental stuff and designing from the inside out. So the building is LED gold. It's going to create dividends, and it's beautiful, maybe not, but I think that Brown finally got it right. They obviously didn't get it right with that art center.
Well, the first version that we never saw any drawings for, but a megalopicus it was going to be. Now they've come back with a second version.
Yeah, right. But I was also thinking of that earlier one that looks like the accordion building. You know, the one on
Oh, yeah.
yeah, the Granoff Center.
Yeah, right.
Which is an intriguing building, but it's poorly sited, and the only reason Brown built it was to show that they could hire some trendy, avant-garde, edgy architect, and what they got was a trendy, edgy, avant-garde building, which, you know,
And very difficult space inside if you've been into it.
yes, because
it's not
they
used very well.
decided they would have these different things so you could look over into one building into the other one.
Yeah.
You know.
And one other thing about Brown's construction is it always seemed turned internal to Brown, and we get the garbage dumps on the backside. We always get the dumpsters where the garbage gets picked up. They've got one on Brook and Waterman, right? Where that's where the dumpsters are, and there's a couple others.
Awful building on Brook and Waterman. And then they tore down those 7 Victorian houses that summer. I think universities should be the leaders, but they're oftentimes the worst. Back in the old days of Antoinette Downing, the president of Brown was on the board of Providence Preservation Society, and he was there to find out what buildings were going to come on.
Well, because he, like everyone else, was scared of Antoinette Downing.
Yeah, but he was finding out which buildings were in danger, and then Brown could buy them and tear them down. They're struggling, but I think they're doing better. They've hired Toshiko Mori to do an addition to the Watson Center, and she's a great architect. But Kieran Timberlake, they just did the American Embassy in London. What is it, 750 million pounds, the building that Trump refused to dedicate.
Right.
But he called it awful. It's pretty amazing given what they had to do. Anyway, I think Brown could be on the right track.
Have you gotten any look at the new Performing Arts Center? Are there any drawings out
No,
of that?
I haven't seen it. But that's another thing that happens, and that's why what you're doing at GoLocal is so important. This stuff is never discussed.
Yeah.
Things that are going to change the shape of a city for our campus or something for 50 years don't get any coverage.
Well, I will tell you, the first Performing Arts Center was up for a hearing right around Christmas time, and news editor Kate Nagel went up there and did Facebook Live and streamed the whole thing, and the audience kept growing and growing and growing and growing, and then they abandoned the plan. I saw a high-ranking Brown official, and she said, "Oh, you killed our project."
Good.
And I said, "Well, we didn't kill your project. We just shed a little light on your project."
They weren't always thinking, and of course, Brown, they're subject to donors. There was the whole thing with the what's the swims, the Nelson Fitness Center, and they're getting there.
Yeah.
You know, they want to have an architecture school. That's one of the sort
So
of
there's a lot of building going on right now, and we're
Yeah.
going to have you back regularly. What's your what's the thing you see out there right now that's the most inspiring, the most exciting, the most?
It's probably houses. It's not public buildings, with the exception of the building at Brown,
Yeah.
because all of the buildings, like the new hotels that are going up, the thing that's going to replace that replaced the Fogarty building, whatever it was.
Yeah.
They're all basically suburban motel suites that could be anywhere USA. And I think that what thing is happening are things like, you know, architecture alone doesn't make a city. The things that are happening, you can see it over on the east side. You know the bagel place, Ravel?
Yeah.
It's changing the neighborhood,
Yeah,
the same way
right.
the Seven Stars did up.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's happened, that Hope Street has become, you know, and we're going to talk about Thayer Street
Yeah, absolutely.
at some point, and it's probably on its way to being destroyed. You know, we just need more time to think about things, to look at them, to ask questions, you know, and to hold our politicians accountable.
Well, Will, thank you as always. I
that
want
it?
to thank you so much. Stay right here. We're going to be right back in 1 second. I want to thank Will Morgan, one of the preeminent architectural writers, thinkers, critics, and it's a real joy to have him here on GoLocal Live. We'll be right back in 1 second with Matt Hassett. Welcome back, everybody, to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. It is Business Monday. I want to thank our friends at Deepwater Wind for helping us out on this. Just on was Will Morgan, really one of the preeminent architectural writers, critics in America, with some great insights into all the different projects that are now being built around Providence. Took a little chat on the Fane Tower, which, let's put it clearly, he is not a big fan of. Matt Hassett is here. Matt and I have a long history. We worked on one of the craziest projects of all time down in the Dominican Republic. That's for a different show. Today he's on talking about a really interesting startup initiative for millennials in Rhode Island. Give us a little overview.
Yeah, so I guess the first thing I can say is I'm the old man in the group. I was looking at a breakdown of what a millennial is, and I think I make the cutoff by like a few days.
Yeah, good for you.
But yeah, so this group is of a bunch of talented, very smart young people, young professionals that we're really looking for a way to connect with each other across Rhode Island and also have a platform.
Right.
And so it's really built on the foundation of social media, but also we have goals in mind that we want to kind of give back in the sense that we're connecting with nonprofits. We're also trying to do what we can with business development. And the thing that hit home for me in particular was I spent 10 years in New York City. And you go out, you do networking in New York, and you can't walk into a bar without meeting 100 different 30-somethings that are, successful professionals
Right.
with like, an ambitious mindset. And you want to find that in Rhode Island, but it's a little harder to find. So
A little harder than in Manhattan? Yeah, I would say.
so that was kind of our goal. Is
If we had that, we'd be Manhattan.
Exactly.
No, it's, there's a lot of young energy that's starting to emerge, and especially as people get more developed. Talk about some of the ways you're bringing folks together, and I know you're trying to channel it for the best of the community. Talk a little bit about those initiatives as well.
Sure. So, our website, we have...
What's the URL?
So it is fountainheadri.org. So on the website, you'll see the story of the board members and, where everything came from. Dave Almonte, it's really his brainchild. But we have a nonprofit of the quarter, and one of our board members, Erica Basila-Adams, is, like a pro in the nonprofit world. She must be on 15 different boards, and is constantly giving us tutelage on what it means to be on a board. And then our goal is to drive content obviously through the website, but also host events. And
yeah.
So we do a mix of fun events, networking, along with some very topical events that are more kind of panel discussions.
Great.
We had one in particular that on the top of my head was at the Rhode Island Foundation, basically just trying to educate young people. If you want to get on a board, how do you do it?
Right.
And so we had some seasoned nonprofit people basically giving advice. Here's how you go about it.
And how big's the group, and how's it growing and emerging, and what's the momentum behind it?
Yeah, so at the moment we don't have members.
Yeah.
But the network is probably networked across a couple thousand people at this point.
That's great.
And I would say, maybe in the future at some point we'll set it up where there's specific members, and you have more that you can do directly on the site. But for right now, again, our goal is to promote a couple events a year, and also just be there for the interests and activities of our network. Erica is on the board of the Autism Project. They're having a walk coming up this weekend, so it's something that we
trying to push and support good causes in Rhode Island. And are you seeing some energy grow across Rhode Island on just sort of, you're seeing some improvement in the economy in the past couple of years? Are you seeing more growth and interaction and more confidence amongst people in the community?
Yeah, definitely. And it's great when you meet those new people through the group, and they're like, "Man, I've been looking for something like this." And having lived in Rhode Island my whole life, despite my short departure, but this,
yeah.
After you think you know everybody in the state, and when you come across a new network of people, and you're like, "Wow, these are really smart, really cool people that I don't know."
Yeah, right.
And,
well, that's been the great part of GoLocal Live. We've been doing it for just a little over a year. I think we've had 1,400 guests, and it's just remarkable the people that have come on, and you're like, where have you been? Because I thought I knew everybody.
Yeah.
And the stories that come out of it, and the initiatives and the energy, especially in the nonprofit community and people trying to support it. On another note, you're a financial service pro at Janney, and just give us any advice on watching the stock market on a day-to-day basis. Is it just put your head down and...
obviously, you are one of the guys that we spoke quite a long time ago about how Warren Buffett, is the greatest investor of all time, and he says, buy something that you want to hold 10 years from now.
Yeah, right.
And that doesn't necessarily mean that you don't sell it if some bad things are happening and you don't like what's going on, but you approach stuff with that in mind. And so the volatility that we've had this year, basically since January, is a lot more normal.
Yeah.
And the lack of volatility that we had last year was not normal, but...
Well, last year was just straight up, almost unprecedented straight up. It was hard to argue with straight up.
Yeah.
So listen, last thing relative to the effort to bring millennials together, how can folks who hear this, see this, read this tomorrow, how can they best get involved with you guys?
Yeah, so either through our website, we're on LinkedIn and Facebook as well. Reach out if you recognize anybody In particular, that's the easiest way, but if you just go to send us a message to the website, then someone will get back to you right away. And yeah, I mean, we're looking to really bridge that gap between the senior business leaders, the senior politicians of Rhode Island with, you know, the college students that are out there looking for internships, and we want to be that middle ground, you know, just
That's right.
pulling everybody along the way.
And we'll have all the links in tomorrow so people can find you guys easily. I want to thank you for coming on.
Thank you
and
for
keep
having
us
me.
up to date. And anytime you're doing one of the events, come back over and let us help get the message out. Stay right here. We're going to be right back. I think the money man, Gary Sass, is in the house, and we'll be talking about state budget, federal issues, you name it when it comes to Rhode Island politics and money. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. It is Business Monday on GoLocal Live. Welcome to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm Josh Fenton with cha-ching, the money man, Gary Sass. Whew. It is a wild and woolly period of time. Chaos everywhere.
Tell me about this chaos.
Well, we got chaos in the governor's race. We got Joe Trillo throwing bombs at everyone. We've got Matt Brown out there somewhere. Kate Nagel's got a story, I think, is it up? We don't know. But Kate Nagel's got a story that Lincoln Chafee is very unlikely to run for governor this cycle.
I heard that.
So that's some big news in the governor's race. The race seems to be amongst the candidates, not amongst the public, but amongst the candidates already running. They're all stressed out. They're all swiping and unhappy and all those kind of things. You've been involved in this for a long time, back when you didn't even have credit cards and you just had cash piled up in the basement. What's going on here? Is this just...
It's called walking around money. Okay.
Is this just the reality of the chaos of politics today, coupled with a governor who's at 40% approval rating?
I think so. I think certainly a majority of the people do not believe the state is going in the right direction. The governor doesn't appear to be, relating to the average working people. She's not a particularly popular governor. Probably the most vulnerable Democratic incumbent governor in the United States. So that would, bring out candidates. The two candidates in the Republican primary shouldn't be unexpected. Mayor of Cranston, Alan Fung, ran before. It was clear he was interested. Pat Morgan has paid her dues, working her way up to minority leader. So that's pretty typical, particularly when there's a vulnerable person of the other party sitting in the governor's chair.
Then when you get beyond that, it becomes a little weird. I think, Trillo prides himself on being Rhode Island's Donald Trump. He sent out some comments about the Starbucks situation.
Yes, he chided the CEO of Starbucks. We had a good juxtaposition of Ray Rickman saying, this is pretty much racism. I mean, two guys sitting there waiting for a friend and you get arrested. Generally doesn't happen as a white customer who has been waiting at Starbucks many a time. I have yet to be arrested.
Well,
and then Joe Trillo saying that the CEO of Starbucks collapsed under the pressure of...
The CEO of Starbucks, Joe's right about one thing. The CEO of Starbucks is a left-winger. There's no question about that. But the fact that Joe would put that into a campaign...
Oh yeah, no, he was
whatsoever.
pouring gasoline on the fire.
And so that's the Trump effect. And I think that's really a foolish position to be in because people don't ordinarily, though there are exceptions, and if you look to Washington, you might find one, don't vote for demagogues.
Yeah.
Bigotry, there are dog whistles and there's outright bigotry.
Yeah.
And, so I think that candidacy reflects the confusion nationally. I don't know who's paying attention right now. It's a nice spring.
I don't think the public's paying much attention. Although today's story about Matt Brown did very well, far beyond the insider readership.
I saw that story. Is that the story that went back and looked at the history?
Yeah,
of the
yeah. Looked at his donor base over the years. He's saying he's going to run as sort of a Bernie Sanders left of the governor as an independent. And you go back and look, and God bless him, in the early 2000s, he was a voracious fundraiser and was strongly supported by the most affluent, powerful families in Rhode Island.
Who were part of the insiders. And
yeah, that's right. I mean, it's hard to say I'm going to run from the outside and change everything, but the Gilbanes and the Choquettes and the Sharps and the Goddards and the Chases, he had them all.
And those insiders reflect what happens in elections in the state, and they elect some very liberal and very progressive people. So I will say, I don't know if he's history or there's something new. It's hard to determine at this point.
So Will Morgan was on. He literally is one of the preeminent architectural critic writers in America, and he was talking about how ugly the Fane Tower is, and Wexford's bland, and this building's this, and that building's there, and the Brown building's there. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of construction going on. Does the governor get any points for that? There's some real velocity in at least in the construction industry?
Well, the governors and the building trades are joined at the hip.
They are very close.
Yeah.
She was just spoke down at their national convention last week.
Well, it depends. If the public has a perception that these buildings are going to provide employment beyond a temporary construction employment, and there'll be synergies and there'll be clusters developed and
Right.
there's economic opportunity, you certainly get credit. But I was in a meeting close to the State House and I saw those big green buildings. So we've given tax credits to build apartment houses across from the train station.
Right.
I don't think anybody gets too excited about that. That's not real economic
No,
development.
and those people are probably next to the train station because they're going to take the train to Boston every day.
Yeah, and then the question on the Wexford project is interesting. If it turns out to be the Wexford project that existed in North Carolina or in Maryland, that's one thing. But if it's the Wexford project that has empty laboratories and a hotel, and it houses a relocated Brown office, that's quite a different thing. So clearly, I think what you can say is the governor should get some credit. There is activity, but that's not resonating with people because I don't think people see directly how that's going to improve them or their family situations.
The budget situation seems to be still a little troublesome. We talked about it in detail last week. Revenue numbers continue to see upswing across almost all the categories, which is the good sign. Spending and fixing some problems also seems to be. So, but both sides seem to be...
the state has a structural deficit, and we spoke before about incremental budgeting and pulling rabbits out of the hat. Well, if state revenues run ahead by 2.5% this year, that's another 50 to 60 million. So that compounds next year. So that probably gets you enough money to wiggle your way
out of this year.
But then whoever the next governor is going to find themselves with a hell of a fiscal mess in January.
When Bruce Sundlin came in, it was credit union, it was a number of structural issues, including a massive budget shortfall of $300 or $400 million. I think that first year, and the budget was about half the size that it is now. I want to say it was $5 billion, and we had a $400 million deficit. And what he did with the departments was he said, give me 3 or 4 different budget levels, a 10% cut, a 15% cut, and a 20% cut, and be ready. Don't shorten the process in doing the analysis, because any one of those scenarios could be implemented, and they did.
I was Bruce's fiscal advisor, as you know, for the first 6 months of that administration. Well, the difference is we had a governor then who understood business and was serious about bringing the budget back into balance. And keep in mind, too, we had to keep the temporary sales tax increase just to pay off, DEPCO.
And real furloughs.
Yeah.
Every 10th day was a furlough.
And we negotiated tough with the unions, reduced the size of the workforce. There was a lot done to improve the structure of the financial structure, but you have to have a will to do it. And what's missing right now is I don't see the political will to bring spending under control. As a matter of fact, you look at the current budget and you have $25+ million worth of scoops. You have money being taken away from transportation projects that was for maintenance and going back into the general fund. You got money in the budget for gambling, which the Supreme Court hasn't decided on. No,
is the ultimate irony is that we're betting on the Supreme Court coming out with a decision?
We're betting on a Trump appointee, Mr. Gorsuch, or Justice Gorsuch. But those things.
By the way, who just disappointed the right on a recent decision last week?
Well, he actually read the law. Good for him. So you have, I'm just giving you examples, and on top of that, today the head of the state Medicaid agency came out and said we should restore an ill-founded, ill-timed, ill-begotten, cut in Medicaid spending, another $16 million. We're talking about, and so there seems to be a disconnect between dealing with the problem and trying to get through this election year. This is the most election year budget I've seen in some time. There's a lot of gimmicks in that budget. I think they'll muddle through. We always do. Revenues are running better. But you can wake up on January 2nd with a headache.
Could the next governor, everybody always talks about zero-based budgeting. Could a governor actually, listen, there's certain things that are locked in by federal requirements. But on everything else, could we ever actually could a new governor or this governor coming back from re-election say, you know what, the first 60 days, we're going to really look at this budget. We're going to come back with something completely different, because we can't do the things, we can't do the new initiatives without actually making some reforms to our spending structure.
Well, to a limited degree, not completely, and let me tell you what I mean by that. Medicaid.
Yeah.
300,000 Rhode Islanders, federal mandates, 34% or over 30% of the state budget. You can't touch that.
Yeah.
Education aid, another $1 billion. No governor would suggest that we start pulling back on education aid. So once you've taken education aid and Medicaid spending, and we haven't touched anything else, just those two items, that's 2/3 of the budget. So are you talking about zero spending on base spending on a third of the budget? That's not going to solve the problem, and that's the same problem the federal government has, because when you look at the amount of the federal budget that's discretionary versus non-discretionary, you can't get there just by cutting discretionary spending.
You're going with the traffic camera strategy across Rhode Island. No. The only way we're going to...
I think we got to stop gimmicks, and really, sit down, and we're increasing the payroll this year.
Yeah.
There's no excuse to increase the payroll this year.
Last time, what was interesting in February to March numbers on the job numbers, forget which numbers we're using, construction was down February to March, manufacturing was down February to March, and government services was up.
Yeah, and so, what that says, basically is that the investments that we're making in the private sector, at least to this point, peaked, and and we don't see where they go. They're plateaued. We'll see where it goes from this point on. But you got to get serious about the budget. You got to set priorities, and there are things that government is doing that maybe we shouldn't be doing. But then you look at the UHIP problem, which is hundreds of thousands of dollars. You look at the
hundreds of millions of dollars. Yeah.
You look at.
I know it's all the same to you, Mr. Moneyman.
Just
hundreds of thousands, hundreds of millions.
Just zeros.
Just zeros.
But and then you look at the deplorable conditions in some of the group homes where we take care of kids.
Absolutely.
And as a taxpayer, you sit back and you say, what the heck is going on? We can't take care of kids properly that are in state wards. We can't get up a computer system to hand out checks, which is basically what it does. It's people eligible for certain kinds of benefits. We can't have a serious conversation about really reforming Medicaid by delivering services more efficiently. And so I think there's a question of setting priorities. I think it's a question of looking at the way we deliver certain services and making changes.
Tomorrow night, the City of Providence budget address goes forward. We're in a period of time in the City of Providence where real estate values, especially on the east side, are growing dramatically, which is masking a lot of the structural issues that are going to come home to roost the next time there's a recession. What should this mayor be doing?
What should this mayor be doing?
Yeah.
Well, it's a good question. I think in certain areas he has to invest and demand more performance and accountability from schools, because unless we turn around our schools, the excitement you look at this windows downtown is not going to change very much.
Right.
They say if you're not the lead dog, the scenery doesn't change. I think we have some good people in the school department now. I think this current superintendent has potential to be an effective leader.
He's your guy, right? You like him?
I don't know if he's my guy, but I think he's trying to do a good job, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think he has to be focused on education, but focused on performance and accountability. The rest of it is very difficult because you're hemmed in by these contracts. If you look at Providence's budget, again, schools, public safety, police and fire, very little else that we spend money on. And you have these contracts, you have concerns about the level, particularly in the police department, of adequate manning on the streets.
Providence is one of the only cities in the country in which has higher staffing for the fire department than does the police department. You've got staffing of about 400 in the police department. It should be just fully funded and fully staffed at about 500. It seems to be an upside down priority. That's nothing new. That's been going on for a couple decades.
That raises an important question. You said what the state could do. Labor laws, particularly as it affects firefighters, the rules of the game are set in the legislature.
Yeah.
And until the legislature, modernizes labor laws that affects negotiating at the municipal level, you've kind of tied the hands of mayors behind their back. And then this as well as anybody, the elephant in the room are these pensions. And to think you can sell an asset and then fund down your pension liability without making the other reforms is,
No, I know.
the prophecy continues.
Listen, I don't think it's the worst idea in the world to monetize in some structure the Providence Water Supply Board. I mean, it's a massive asset that creates no value for the taxpayer or the city. I don't know what the best construct is yet. I think that's going to get poked at.
That's another issue.
Well, you value it based on what will somebody pay for it. But the question is, if it's a one-time offering and you pick up $150, $200 million and you use it to offset some of the ongoing pension liabilities or healthcare liabilities, it's a drop in the budget. You've got to combine $2 billion right about between long-term health coverage and pension. So $200 million doesn't even get you in the game.
You have to face the reality that if you could monetize part of your unfunded liability, at the same time you need to deal with benefit levels.
Yeah.
And to think that we can continue as new people are hired. I understand it's a contract. I don't want to take benefits away from anybody that has this contracted obligation. But it may be time for a Class A and a Class B and a Class C set of benefits. You need to think outside the box as far as those concerned. And it is a revenue issue, but it's not just a revenue issue. It's a policy issue on what future costs are going to be and how we're going to control those costs.
Well, and I think some other mayors have wasted good crises. You know, there's been some significant financial issues in the city, which were the opportunities to make wholesale changes. I honestly think the public unions were ready for it. They understood it was coming. And it seems like everybody who becomes mayor then thinks they're running for something else, and they often do. Paolino, Cicilline, Taveras want to go run for some other office, and thus the pressure to make the tough changes is minimized because they don't want to lose union support to go and run for another office.
No, that's understandable. You know, it'd be anytime you elect your own boss, your leverage is affected by that. But
that's why we need a powerful, you can move up from East Greenwich, powerful, independent guy like you to run the city of Providence.
No, you need a city that's responsive to the concerns of the citizens, but being responsive also means that you have to be responsible.
Right.
And the problem is everyone recognizes the problems. We could stand here for the next 5 hours and discuss what the
We're
problem.
sitting.
Yeah. Well, sometimes you feel we could agree on what the problems are. They've been described for a long time, but at some point somebody's going to have to take over and do something about it. Now, it's a political system, so people have to be responsive. But you have to be responsive in a way that begins to solve the problems. And to think you can solve it just by monetizing it, you can get some relief from monetizing it, but at the end of our grandchildren have a problem as well.
Last question before you go. This governor's race, is this going to be, we talked last time a little bit, is it a referendum about Gene Orr? Is it a referendum about the future of Rhode Island's finances? Is that really what it comes down, where economic growth is going to come?
That's a very good question, because right now I'm not sure what it's a referendum on. We have a sitting governor that talks about economic development, and no one believes that it's really happening.
I think in fairness to her, she thinks about it, she spends a lot of time on it, she works at it, whether or not it's driving the change we want to see.
Well, you can look at the growth numbers nationally and look at the growth numbers in Rhode Island, and with all the attention we're paying for it, you can come to your own conclusions by looking at those numbers. But unfortunately, the politics at this point is very confused. I'd like to see a good race. I'd like to see whoever the eventual Republican candidate is, put out their proposal, with all the T's crossed and the I's dotted on how they think they can move this economy forward, and use that as a benchmark or measuring stick against what the governor has done, because she has to defend her record. Now, that would be a positive, regardless of the outcome. That would be a positive election and a positive discussion. I don't see it happening right now. And the reason I don't see it happening is it's a very confusing race. You get a Republican, a Democrat, a Trillocrat, what you end up doing is playing a game of who can siphon off the most votes from whom, and that doesn't have room for serious discussion of the issues.
Yeah, we've got 10 candidates all.
Oh, I think with Trillo in the race, I think it puts the Republican candidate, whoever that is, at a serious disadvantage.
Matt Brown could be the offsetting factor, potentially.
Yeah, we'll see what happens with that.
Listen, I want to thank the Money Man Ching for being on. Always insightful. We've still got to recruit him to move up to Providence, make that run in 2018 for the mayor of Providence.
If you give me a penthouse in
the Superman building?
That'd be okay.
We're going to be right back in 1 second with Mr. Innovation, Saul Kaplan. We're going to talk Amazon HQ too. Be right back. We are back. It is Business Monday. This is Saul Kaplan. I'm Josh Fenton. Thanks to our friends at Deepwater Wind for their sponsorship, and as always, from the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. Mr. Innovation, lots of news coming out of the Boston and Washington area.
Yeah.
HQ2 is looking, it seems to be the Vegas has the inside scoop, and it seems to be either Northern Virginia or Boston, Mass. What's your take on all this?
Well, the rumors are flying, so
Yeah.
now, you don't know with you news guys. Somebody puts it out there and then everybody just repeats it. But I hear over and over that it's between Washington and Boston, but I
you
don't
don't
know.
think Jeff Bezos is
I don't know.
leaking this for his
Yeah.
own purposes?
Yeah,
I don't think it's showing up in Columbus.
Yeah, well, I don't know. They're logical choices, so I mean, we can talk about them if they are, in fact, the finalists. It makes sense. I think it's an interesting fight between the two, to be honest with you. Amazon already has a presence in both.
Yeah, big presence.
Yeah, I've always said all along that this is about access to talent,
Yeah.
but it's also about putting another nexus in the country, beyond what they have on the West Coast, and trying to increase their political footprint, which would argue for DC.
Yeah.
Right. So there they are, right in the backyard.
Or not.
Right. Yeah. Well, but I like the talent argument.
Yeah.
Because which I think
would-
gives the nod to Boston.
Yeah, right. MIT, Harvard,
right.
Tufts,
Right. Because
Brown,
Jeff Bezos
RISD.
is all about innovation. He's all about what's next, about experimenting all the time. Did you see the letter that Jeff Bezos wrote this week, kind of Warren Buffett style, open
I did
letter
not see
to
it.
the shareholders? You should look at it. You should post it on your site so your listeners.
Is this one where he
yeah.
outed that he has 100 million
Yes.
Prime members?
Yeah, well, that's one really amazing thing. 100 million people on Amazon Prime, and they're just getting started.
Right.
And they are obsessed with customer experience, and they have a base of 100 million folks that are signed up for Amazon Prime. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. But read the whole letter,
Yeah.
because he just goes over this notion of being obsessed with the customer. Which he's been about, right from the beginning. He talks in a very interesting way in the letter about high standards, right? If you set a standard for excellence, you're a whole lot more likely to achieve it. And he wants that for, the 500,000+ people who now work, for Amazon and growing like crazy. But he talks about setting high standards and says, just because you claim that you manage personally to a high standard. He says it's domain specific. And by that he means I could have a really high standard in one area of my life,
right.
but you could have a blind spot in another one. And so he challenges himself and the whole organization to do it. I think it's going to be really interesting. I'm rooting for Boston. I think it's in Rhode Island's best interest. It's in New England's best interest for this to happen in the Northeast. I think there are going to be overflow effects here in Rhode Island, so my sentiment is rooting for Boston. I had always hoped that we would figure out how to help strengthen their bid because it's in our best interest to do that.
I think it's very interesting. I think it is wildly exciting for New England, but I think there will be some unintended consequences.
Oh, so absolutely.
50,000 new people, well paid. Where are they going to live? And the implications to a market like this where real estate prices are already disproportionate to income levels. Let's say we get 5,000, 7,000, 10,000 affluent people moving to Rhode Island. Great, wonderful, but that's not going to certainly help our affordability problems.
One of the things I read about Boston is that if you actually look at the people who live in the surrounding areas, right, of all the finalists, they have the lowest percentage of people who actually live in the area that support the deal, right? It's just true, right? Because of that, because of
in traffic. I mean, in Boston,
unintended consequences of success.
People did not want the Olympics in Boston.
That's for sure.
Overwhelming, 70. I think it hit up to 70, 75%. And in part because even though it was only going to be for really a month, 6 weeks, they just did not want to deal with.
Well, there's a lot of people who don't want Amazon HQ2 for that same reason. I believe
some
they are.
employers have got to be worried about somebody going out with 50,000.
Grabbing all that talent.
Grabbing all that
No
talent.
kidding. No kidding. But, you know, I think this is a high-class problem to have.
Right.
In the end, if Boston wins...
You don't want to be so parochial that you're arguing against one of the leading companies in the world coming
But you
into your
want to have
market.
your eyes open for the unintended consequences, you know, that any successful play has. Anytime somebody new moves into the area, there's more competition for talent. It drives up the wage levels. That's great. You know, if you're on the receiving end of that,
Absolutely.
that's not so great if you're a business struggling and you're not competitive and you can't afford to pay those wages.
Absolutely.
So the real key here is how to be successful with your eyes open and empathy for the impact of what that success means. We've talked many times about all of this success we're talking about here for Amazon, right? It really hurts a lot of the parts of our economy that weren't ready and are still not ready. That's not my argument for why we shouldn't support it. It's the argument for keeping your eyes open and having empathy for the fallout, for the consequences of what this new technology and these new business models actually mean.
Well, listen, at the growth, the rate of growth of Amazon, it may be 50,000 in 5 years. It could be 100,000 new jobs 5 years after that, the way that company is growing.
Oh, it'll be way more than that, but they'll spread it out because they'll need to get they'll need to go get the talent, and you can't get it all from the same area. I mean, at a smaller scale, we have that same challenge. All of these new deals for here in Rhode Island are all looking for the same high-tech digital,
they're all looking for
data
the same,
management skills, right?
Programmers, etc.
Right.
And in most cases, we've exhausted all those resources. And many of the folks that are taking these jobs at J&J and at GE, etc., are coming into the state, which isn't the worst
Which is a
thing
good thing
as
too.
well.
Which is a good
But
thing
it
too.
only masks our problem of K through 12,
Correct.
CCRI, which we've talked about a lot. And I've not kept up with what the timeline is. Do we have a date certain?
I've not seen any date certain. I don't think they've committed to a date certain, and so that's why I have to question whether the knowledge of who the two finalists are is real or not. But it makes sense that Washington and Boston would be amongst the finalists. And again,
I've always felt
root
it
for
had to
Boston.
be an East Coast. This idea of Denver or Chicago,
I would agree.
or that just doesn't make any
For
sense.
the reasons we talked about before, not just getting talent, but that more and more of our government leaders are going to be having to pay attention to these trends. We know from watching the Facebook hearings that a lot of our elected leaders know painfully little about this changing technology and what it means for society. It was embarrassing to me to see how little our leaders actually know about something that's going to change all of our lives and is already changing our lives. So I hope it's a clarion call to think about leaders that actually know something about the levers that are going to affect our life.
It was so embarrassing. Literally not
Right.
have any idea of how to turn on a computer. Let's jump over to our favorite subject, Deloitte. We called for the state to cut ties with them in an editorial today.
Yes.
Enough's enough. This thing's going to end in litigation one way or the other. I think there's already ongoing litigation that's on hold, trying to get some leverage over them. This thing's ugly. It doesn't seem to get any better. The best news we've heard is that under the domain of the special master, food stamps will work at an acceptable level, not exactly 100%, and that's supposed to take place on May 19th or 20th, but cost increase, it looks like another 100 million, and there seems to be some lack of attention to the fact that even after that 100 million, just the maintenance and natural growth and of the amoeba is going to cost tens of millions of dollars.
The amoeba.
Add in that the feds are now starting to penalize Rhode Islanders with penalties. Enough's enough.
Listen to you getting all biological, the amoeba. That's pretty funny. Okay, we were talking about this in my office today. You get the grades for the compelling headlines for sure, right? Listen, there's plenty of blame to
There's
go around
a 40-page paper application after spending $500 million. What factoid do you need that this entire technology overhaul is so fatally flawed?
Yes.
Tell me a company in the United States, in the world, that would spend $500 million and come up with a flawed system. Major corporations in the world don't build information technology infrastructure that cost $500 million.
My point for today, because we've talked plenty about all the problems and all the blame to go around.
Do you notice we divorced ourselves of any blame?
You asked me a very specific question.
Yes.
Your headline says, should we fire Deloitte? Let's go back to your unintended consequences. So I know it makes a great headline. Fired, first of all, Deloitte is,
I think it was
is
affirmative.
giving us this
Fire,
service
it's
for
time
free.
to fire Deloitte.
Yeah. First of all, the work they're doing now, we're not paying for. So in the scenario that you say fire Deloitte, do you imagine us having to hire someone that we would actually have to pay, or are you actually saying let's walk away and treat the whole thing as a sunk cost?
Well, I think the question is really, are we not paying them, or are we just not paying them during this period of political season, and that it's holding off litigation? At some point, the continuation of this program is not going to fall under the existing $500 million.
Yeah.
It's going to incur additional costs.
That's true regardless of, that's true. Any care and feeding of the system and getting it right, yes, there's going to be costs going forward, right? But if you treat it as a sunk cost and you say, let's stop and let's completely start over again. How long is that going to take? How much is that going to cost? What happens to customer service, citizen service in the interim? So before you start saying...
Do you think Salesforce, one of the more complicated constructors of information technology that links, QuickBooks and this and that and different platforms, do you think they spend $500 million to connect five different distinct? No.
They do, but then they sell access to that platform to all 50 states, right? To be able to make a return on that investment. There is no question that if we have a clean sheet of paper, right, that we would do it very differently. It would be citizen-centered, as we've talked about before. It would be designed to make the citizen's life easier and the efficiency on the government side.
So your argument is, hey, listen, we've already down this route. Forget that the program doesn't work. Forget that it's not customer-centric. Forget that we're even on a paper-based 40-page document. We're too far down the road. We got to continue.
No, I'm not arguing
off the cliff to plunge to our death.
No, I'm not arguing that. I'm saying,
am I unfairly framing that question?
That's not that's not the argument I'm making. We do have to go forward, and there are options. Yes, one of those options is write the whole thing off and start over again. I don't actually think that's probably the option that we're going to end up with. So before you start saying, fire Deloitte, tell me what the answer is. So I think
it says it. It says, listen, wind down. We're going to end up in litigation regardless. That's a guarantee. Every state that's worked with them virtually. Of course. Cisco in Oregon was $300 million.
And we'll try to recover as much of it as we can.
Try and recover. But let's start the process of upgrading the system. We also have good indications based on the oversight hearings that the system really isn't going to work how we would expect it to work. And also, it's 6-year-old, the framework of it, how this was envisioned, is now 6 years old.
We're ready for the next one. We're actually ready for the next one anyway.
What technology is 6 years old now?
My point is...
How old's your website?
Figure out, we just launched our new website.
Okay, and you're going to hold on to that for 6 more years.
6 months anyway. 6 months. Now they're really worried back in the office. No, I think you have to be thoughtful about what the available paths are, and it's never as easy as just stop doing what you're doing, right? It's usually more nuanced than that. I want to see an analysis, right? And before you start pointing blame at any one of the parties, right? There's plenty of blame to go around.
I think
Who
that
made
editorial said that 100%.
Right.
This is not. We got to get out of the blame game. Blame of the game is the political season. Let's skip over that. Whatever it is.
Well, you got us talking about it in the office. Now we're talking about it here today.
Absolutely.
So I guess that's what the news story is supposed to do. On this you were right. I mean, it's a mess, and it has been a mess. Way past this current way before this current administration. That is not an excuse for not being really clear about what the path forward is and being held accountable for outcomes, citizen service.
Are we bound to have the same type of outcomes because we don't have the expertise within state government to design, envision, engage people in creating new technology solutions to old customer service problems?
Well, we do have...
Health Source, you cannot do by mobile.
It's not just our state. This is true in government at every level. We just talked about, the lack of technology skills, sitting at the federal level,
Yep.
with our leaders. If these capabilities are the capabilities and the superpowers we need to make our lives better, we have got to source the talent that can help us deploy these new capabilities in a way that improves the lives and outcomes for us, the citizens here. So yes, at every level.
So let's tie the two
we're
together.
doing-
Is there
Go ahead.
any chance that Jeff Bezos, and part of his constant level of innovation, is looking at replacing the Amazon platform with a 40-page paper document, that would be how you utilize Prime? Is that one of the things on the whiteboard over in Seattle,
Yeah.
soon to be Boston or Washington?
Well, I'll tell you what is on the whiteboard. It'll be to the tune of many billions of dollars. Amazon Web Services is underpinning many of these new capabilities.
Absolutely.
And
Can I
Jeff
just tell you-
Bezos did it for himself, and then he put that platform out, and it's one of their fastest growing service
And
lines right now.
crushing competitors.
Right.
And they get cheaper
Yep.
and cheaper and cheaper. We've always used
Right.
Amazon Web Services in our 8 years.
Right.
And literally the bill goes down.
Right. Right, because they keep getting better because they're focused on customer service. For them, it's always about the customer, and so we need government leaders and education leaders and healthcare leaders that are about the citizen, the patient, the student, and be relentless about creating solutions that make their lives better, get them access to the capabilities they need in a more accessible way, in a less expensive way. And that simple idea is what drives Jeff Bezos, and it should drive every leader that wants to stay relevant and be competitive in the 21st century.
I want to thank you.
You're welcome.
I think we pounded the proverbial blank out of both issues. Biff's coming up. Last week we
Yeah.
didn't get a Biff preview.
Yeah.
Biff's in 5 months.
It's coming. It's coming.
Five
It's coming.
months, 4
Yeah,
months, 5
yeah,
months.
yeah.
Give us a little indication of who
Yeah.
will be.
Yeah. So I just released a podcast, part of my podcast series, with an incredible. She's a futurist. Her name is Rita J. King. And she'll be a storyteller at the BIF Summit in September. She coined this idea of the imagination era, imagination age, and then deconstructed that to what does that mean? How can we unleash the imagination in all of us? Not just the folks that we point to and say they're the creatives, let them be creative.
Right.
But how can all of us, mere mortals, tap into the imagination in all of us and tether it to problem solving to do the kinds of things that you and I talk about every week. She's remarkable. You can go listen to the podcast I just did with her. It's really worth listening to. And then at the BIF Summit, she's going to tell us what she's been working on now. It's fascinating. Rita J. King, really good addition to our lineup.
Excellent. Cannot wait for Biff. It is number
This will be our 14th year.
14th.
Yeah, imagine that.
I think you should force all the gubernatorial candidates to attend BIF. It would
Imagine
be the
that.
best thing that ever happened to them.
It's still one of the most fun things we do. It is so inspiring. Just curating and building relationships with all of these folks who share stories, and then putting together the group from around the world who actually comes here, to Providence, to Rhode Island, and every year it's the same. People come here and they don't know any different.
Yeah.
They think we're the most innovative place, and say,
Well, I like
my
going
goodness,
because
right?
I take it as osmosis. Just being in the room with all those smart people, that some of it will transfer.
Now you know why I do it, in the off chance that some of it's going to rub off on me, right? That's exactly right.
To your eye, guys.
There you go, not bad, right?
Yeah. Listen, everybody, I want to thank you for tuning in. Mr. Innovation, Gary Sass, Matt Hassett, Will Morgan. It doesn't get any better than that. A lot of smart people on today. Maybe a few too many men. Next week we'll balance this
right.
out a little better. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow at the 3 o'clock hour. Have a great night and enjoy this beautiful spring weather.